Andrew McAfee, leadership and IT strategist from MIT Sloan School of Management, is in Phoenix right now. He's not here. But through the technology of our friends at both the Arizona State University Global Institute of Sustainability and the company Double Robot, he's here. And I'm very pleased to ask you to welcome to the stage Andrew McAfee and Double Robot. Andrew? Andrew's on a roll. It's a slow roll, but... Hey, Andrew.
Hi.
Welcome. Here's your audience. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be wherever I am. About a year and a half ago, my colleague Eric Bring-Olufsen and I wrote a little book called Race Against the Machine, and it pretty quickly joined a really active conversation about technology and its economic impact and its impact on the workforce. And the reason that conversation is really active, basically, is that when you've got about 5 million Americans who haven't been working for the past 6 months, there's a lot of interest in what technology is doing to the labor force. And that conversation is really interesting because it's focused on a question that is simultaneously really interesting and that misses the point. The question that it's focused on is, are the droids taking our jobs? And the reason it's a really important question is that there's some evidence when we look at the economic statistics that they are taking our jobs. So this is a graph of the past close to 20 years of GDP growth. And it's a line that doesn't move a lot because GDP is so big that it doesn't bounce around very much. And the recession ended when GDP stopped going down and started regaining its slow, steady growth. And during the recovery, some other economic statistics started growing again, and they started growing a lot more quickly. So the blue lines here are corporate profits, both with and without the financial service sector included, and you can see they bounce back very quickly. The green line here is business investment in gear, in hardware and software and equipment, and it bounced back very quickly and has never been higher. What didn't bounce back, unfortunately, is employment. So this red line here is the employment to population ratio, or the percentage of working age people in America that actually have work. And it cratered during the Great Recession, and it really hasn't recovered at all since. It's down at a level that we haven't seen for about 30 years, when women had not entered the workforce in any big numbers. And this is not just a recession story. This challenge was facing us before the recession started. This is a graph of job growth, decade by decade in America. And you notice that one of these things is not like the others. Even before the Great Recession, the 2000s were a period of really anemic job growth compared to other decades, to the point that there were fewer Americans working at the end of the decade than there were at the beginning. This is not what you want to see. When you look at the number of people who have jobs versus the number of people of working age, this is what you see. You see a gap that gets bigger, recession by recession, and is now as big as it's ever been. And a really important question is what's going to happen going forward. So I did some very simple calculations. I took the last 20 years of GDP growth and labor productivity growth, and I used those to make a quick projection about how many jobs there are going to be, assuming those trends continue. Now, is this a lot or a little? One way to answer that is to look at how big the working age population is going to be. So when you do these projections, you conclude that the gap that opened up is actually not likely to close, if these projections are accurate.
The problem that I think about is that I don't believe my projections are accurate. And in particular, I don't think that the past about labor productivity growth is a good guide to the future. Because when it comes to technology's impact on the labor force and technology's impact on productivity, my strongest conclusion is we ain't seen nothing yet. Let me give you a couple examples. Throughout all of history, if you wanted something translated from one language to another, you needed a human being involved. Not anymore. There are freely available web translation engines that work in multiple languages and are available on your smartphone for free. And they're not perfect, but they're decent in a lot of cases. Throughout all of history, if you wanted something written, you had to involve a human being. Not anymore. This is an earnings announcement that appeared in Forbes Online, written entirely by an algorithm. And it's not decent, it's actually perfect. You can look at examples like this and think that these are examples of specific narrow tasks. And what knowledge workers actually do is a lot more general and a lot broader. What most knowledge workers do is sit on top of a body of knowledge and information and experience that they've accumulated, and they use that base to answer questions on the fly in kind of an unstructured way without knowing a lot about what's going to happen to them next. They operate in the flow. And you can hear an argument that that kind of knowledge work is not really amenable to automation. One of the most impressive knowledge workers of recent history is a guy named Ken Jennings. He won Jeopardy! 74 times in a row, took home more than $3 million, and he's a pretty good example of a very talented general knowledge worker. This is what happened to him and Brad Rutter, who's the only person to beat him, when they went face-to-face against Watson, the Jeopardy-playing supercomputer developed by IBM. Over the course of a 3-day tournament, the two humans couldn't even come close to Watson in this general knowledge task. They got outscored by a factor of 3 here. So when I look at all these examples, I start to think that the droids really are coming, and they're not just coming for purely knowledge work jobs. I had the chance a little while back to ride in the Google autonomous car, which is a pretty amazing experience. And my main conclusion after getting out of the car, after a ride up and down Highway 101 in Northern California, is that we really shouldn't be in the business of driving cars anymore. It was an excellent driver. It was about as boring as the monorail ride at the airport. And this is, to me, pretty clearly the wave of the future. Now, there's a lot of work that's still very, very physical. And up till now, robots have been pretty lousy at navigating and understanding and manipulating the physical world. But that's likely to change
fairly quickly. DARPA, which is the investment arm of the Defense Department, has just announced a grand challenge to build a humanoid robot that can do an astonishing range of things, like scramble up a hillside, enter a vehicle, turn a key in a lock, open a doorknob, and do a range of other things that have been purely human territory up until now. I think chances are excellent that the contestants in this challenge are going to be successful at it, and that we'll see these kinds of robots easily within the next 10 years. So when I look at all that, I start to get pessimistic, or it's possible to become pessimistic, but actually I maintain a lot of optimism about our future in the face of these astonishing technologies. And to understand why I continue to be so optimistic, I want to ask this incredibly broad question. This question of, honestly, what have been the most important developments in human history? And bear with me, I'm asking this for a reason. This is a wonderful question to ask at a dinner party, because people very quickly with their answers manifest what their background and their beliefs are. When you ask people what they think have been the most important developments in human history, you pretty quickly hear from some philosophers who will talk about new schools of thought in both the West and the East that were profoundly influential on the world and changed the course of human history. You'll hear from other people who say, actually, the big stories of human development are stories of the founding of the world's great religions, which have changed how so many people think about the world and what their place in it is. And then you'll hear from some more warlike people who will say, actually, what's changed the course of human history are the great empires that have been founded and spread around big chunks of the globe. And the important stories in human history are stories of war and conquest. And then you'll also hear from some very cheery people who will say, don't forget about the plagues. And the great developments in human history are developments brought on by microbes, essentially. And you do hear some more optimistic answers to this question. You hear answers about the opening up of the world via exploration. You hear about intellectual developments in fields like mathematics. And you hear about times when there was a flourishing of the arts. So you hear a lot of different answers to this question of what have been the most important developments. And there's not a lot of agreement and not a lot of overlap across them. And if there's a geek at your dinner party when you ask this question, they will very quickly say, they'll approach the question in a very unique way. They will say, well, what do the data say? In other words, geeks like empirical questions. They like questions that can be answered with data. And it actually turns out that I think this is a decent way to look at the question of the most important developments. Because you can grab data about human history. You can look at how many people there are in the world, and you can look at different measures of social advancement of civilizations. And when you start to graph the data, when you turn this timeline into a graph, you very quickly come to one conclusion. And that conclusion is that there has been one story, one big development in human history. And it's not any of the things that have been talked about so far. None of these things bent the curve of human history very much. But something clearly did. There was one development that bent the curve of human history from basically horizontal to basically vertical. And it's a technology development. The great story of human history, when you look at it this way, is the story of the Industrial Revolution, which is the story of overcoming the limitations of our muscles. And the reason that I'm incredibly optimistic now and looking forward to the future is that what we're in the middle of doing right now is overcoming the limitations of our minds to at least the same extent that we overcame the limitations of our muscles with the Industrial Revolution. And how can this not be as big a deal for humankind? So when I look into the near future, again, at the risk of repeating myself, we ain't seen nothing yet. Let me make that concrete in a couple of ways. We all agree that innovation is an incredibly important activity. It's the lifeblood of a society and an economy. And this is a picture of how we used to do innovation. We would take a bunch of similar looking people out of elite institutions. We would put them into other elite institutions, like Bell Telephone Laboratories in this case, and we would wait for the innovation to happen. Now, I'm a white guy who spent his entire career at MIT and Harvard, so I really have no problem with this. But a lot of other people do, and they've really crashed the party of innovation. They've loosened up the dress code, they've dropped the entry requirements, and we're seeing a real flourishing take place as a result. So these are the winners of a top coder programming challenge. And I guarantee you that nobody cares how these guys dress, where they went to school, or really what they look like. All anybody cares about is the quality of their work as manifested by the work itself. So the work of innovation is becoming a lot less credentialist and a lot more open and transparent, and as a result, high speed and high quality. And this is only going to continue. I hear sometimes that technology and innovation have really only been tools for the rich world and have left the bottom of the pyramid behind and contributed to a widening of the digital divide. And I want to say just as clearly as I can, nonsense. That's actually not what's happening at all. There's a beautiful study done by the economist Robert Jensen, who had the chance to study what happened when the subsistence level fishermen of Kerala, India, got mobile phones for the very first time. And as a result, they went from living in a state of almost complete information isolation to being part of a network of information and knowledge. And the conclusions from this study were astonishing. Jensen got to watch for a while what their economic lives were like before the phones came and after the phones came. And he made some really remarkable statements. He said the adoption of mobile phones by these fishermen and wholesalers was associated with a dramatic reduction in price dispersion. We had one price, so people could plan their lives better. Waste wasn't reduced, it was eliminated, and the welfare of both the producers and the consumers here significantly increased. Now, what I don't think is that Jensen got extraordinarily lucky and landed in the one village or one set of villages in India where these amazing things happen. What I believe instead is that Jensen was able to very carefully document what happens over and over when people take advantage of technology, when technology becomes available to them, and when for the first time they have these phenomenal new tools. We see how much better things get. So the farther I go, the more I go with my own research and reading the evidence that others produce, the more convinced I become that this quote from the physicist Freeman Dyson is actually not hyperbole at all. It's a pretty accurate statement about what technology does for us. And we have the great good fortune to be living now during a great flourishing of technology. And this was going to be a great gift for all of us. So I want to end by giving the last word to our friend Ken Jennings, who had a front row seat for technological progress, a keen grasp of Simpsons trivia, and a really good sense of humor. Because his conclusion at the end of getting badly beat by Watson is a conclusion that I happen to share. So I'm going to end up with Ken Jennings' words. I, for one, welcome our new computer overlords. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. You are in Boston, by the way, to your earlier question. And we'll just let you dawdle off the stage and back to your human overlords over here.